The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Hebert, Director of Communications here at Saney's, and I want to welcome you to another Lunch and Learn in our Financial Friday series. Saney's is excited to offer these sessions in cooperation with our corporate partner, AXA. AXA has a long-standing presence in New York, and a large portion of AXA's New York client base is built upon the work they do within the public education system. Through AXA, Saney's members can receive competitive insurance rates and a full array of retirement services, including a complimentary financial profile for Saney's members. And that's something you definitely want to take advantage of. It's a great benefit. So our AXA presenter today is Greg Ronenberger, a Regional Vice President with AXA from the Syracuse office. Before we get started, please note that all participants are muted during this session. However, we will save some time at the end for Q&A, so just put your questions in your Q&A panel to the right, and we'll get to those after the presentation. And we are recording this session, and it will be available at saneys.org probably by the end of the day today. And then also on saneys.org, you'll find a list of your AXA advisors, including our presenter today, Greg, so you can follow up with questions with your advisors as well. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Greg.
All right, Michelle, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for taking some time out of what is a gorgeous day in central New York. Don't know what it's like around the state, but it's rare when I could say sunny in Syracuse in the same sentence. So we're very happy about that. Happy to have you on our final Financial Friday webinar of the year. So this is very exciting for us. And we're going to go through some pension maximization discussion specifically for ERS folks. There are a lot of similarities to the TRS program, but there are some key differences that we'll want to highlight as well for you folks here. So we're going to get right into it here and make sure we leave some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to go over some of the decision-making process that you have, talk about this pension maximization concept that we bring up pretty much any time we're talking with any state employee individuals. But first, a quick overview of just some of the different provisions of the New York State Pension Plan and how to maximize some of these provisions as well. Because when we talk about pension maximization, the first one is how can we increase the benefit formula to our advantage and make sure that we're getting the most that we can from all the time that we put into the state pension system. So number one, in looking at the benefit calculation, a couple of key areas that we can utilize to increase our benefit. Number one, we look at the three criteria. Number one, the age we retire, two, the years of service that we put into the system, and three, our final average salary. Now, I will presume that most people on the call are somewhere in the tier 3 to 4 range. There may be some 5s and 6s out there. So there are a couple of differences with tiers 5 and 6 that we'll cover a little bit, but just keep in mind that a lot of the information in here is going to be maybe more general to the overall ERS system. You definitely do have to look at the different tier provisions if you are a 5 or a 6 out there. So number one, in looking at the years of service, we'll talk about first. The tiers 4, 5 will allow you additional service credit for each year of service that you put in. So of course, the longer you work, the more you're going to get in a pension benefit calculation. But tier 6 does cut off at 30 years. So you're only allowed 30 years worth of service credit in the system there. Final average salary is a key component here, and it's certainly something specific, or a couple things specific with the ERS system. Number one, you've got your 3 highest consecutive years that the state looks at, but any one year, there's a test every single year for your income, and if your income in that year is higher than the average of the previous 2 by 10%, there's going to be a restriction there, and I'll show you an example on the next slide here. But we have to understand that because some people will do a calculation based on their 3-year final average salary and just not compensate for that. So we want to make sure that we've got the right formula there, and knowing that anyone who is a tier 6 is actually a 5-year final average salary calculation. That same 10% rule applies there. Little wrinkle provision in the ERS, overtime pay is included, which is very nice. but there is an annual maximum that will be included for tiers 5 and 6 in there. So you can't just work 80 hours a week and get a bunch of overtime and have all that included. And then up to 30 days of unused vacation time can be included in the calculation as well, as long as the unused vacation time is actually paid out within that year. But let's look at an example here, because this is something that is key and critical. Most people will look at that final year. So year one, and they probably should have numbered these backwards here. But let's say year one is 2018, and then 2017, 2016, and so forth. So many people will look at this salary schedule here, and they'll look at this last year and say, well, okay, we have to do an income test on this year, looking at is it 10% more than these 2 years, and certainly that one is, so there's a reduction there. But what many people don't realize is that every single year here is going to be tested. So even going back to that third year here, say the third year before retirement, you could see the income goes from 25, 26, then up to 31. So maybe there was a promotion or a raise here, or something happened within those couple of years. Maybe there's some overtime that got put on these 2 years here. So this first year of calculation is going to be reduced, as you can see, because it's more than 10% of the average of years 4 and 5. So in this example here, just because of the income spikes, there's going to be a reduction for each of those 3 years. And when you look down at the calculation on the final average salary, if we took year 1, 2, and 3 and just averaged those 3 numbers and took a final average salary, it's around $34,000. However, the state calculation for final average salary is about 10% lower than that. So just make sure that we're using all the right numbers in the calculation when we're trying to do that retirement planning. And understand too that if we're in a situation like this and we say, well, you know what, if we worked 1 extra year and say it's at a $40,000 salary level, well, we're still going to have reductions because we still have this $32,000 in here that's going to hurt the average, but at least this one's going to get taken out of the equation. So we might take a $28,000 number out of the equation, put another $34,000, $35,000 number into the equation, and that makes a big difference when we look at pension planning there. So just wanted to make sure we explain that, got that out there. A couple things to note about the pension that we should definitely feel good about is that the New York State pension is one of the best funded pension programs in the United States. A very strong solvency, what we call solvency ratio. That means that they have the money to pay out the benefits for a long time. Having guaranteed lifetime income is great. We look at people like myself in private industry. I don't have a pension. I have to create one myself. But if you looked at the value of your pension plan, to have or to recreate that income for someone like myself, I probably need about $600,000 to $800,000 minimum in a retirement plan to provide a lifetime benefit income like you folks have. So feel very good about your New York State pension that you have. It's usually the largest income source and retirement source of retirees that we deal with. So it provides us with knowledge and peace of mind that we're going to have this income for the rest of our lives. However, if we're looking at something and saying, this is the biggest part of my pension or biggest part of my retirement income, let's actually take the time to maximize that and to plan out how we're going to do things. And also making sure we know the different limitations that the pension offers as well, because while it's great in a lot of respects, we just need to know the limitators in there. And one of them is when we choose a benefit option. We're going to talk about benefit options in a minute here, but it's really a one-shot deal. Once we make a benefit election, we actually have an oops clause in there that says, all right, you know what, I think I made the wrong choice. Up to 30 days after retirement, you could change that election. So if you say, well, I chose a single life option, but I want to change it to a pop-up, we could do that within 30 days. After 30 days, all bets are off. You're pretty much stuck in there, and the beneficiary that we name is not able to be changed as well. So let's say an extreme example, I retire from the state. I choose my wife as a beneficiary. 2 months into retirement, because I'm around the house an awful lot more than I was before, she decides, you know what, I can't do this for the next 25, 30 years. She decides to leave me. I named her as a beneficiary, and past that 30 days, I can't change that beneficiary. So we just need to make sure we're aware of those things. And unfortunately, that happens to a lot of folks. Cost of living increases aren't great. They're out there, but typically we're looking at maybe $10 a month per year, not a whole lot. We'll talk about the income reductions for putting a spouse on for a joint option. Do know that, and this is a biggie, not a lot of people really think about this. I'm in the system. I'm 58 years old. I plan on retiring at 60. My wife and I are counting on this income. If I pass away in service, there's no pension benefit that is left to a beneficiary. There is an in-service death benefit option through New York State, which is 3 times your salary at that time, but certainly nowhere near the value of what the pension income stream would be. So we need to make sure that we're aware of that and we're doing proper planning. Unfortunately, again, we do see people, and it comes out, a lot of different districts and different newsletters and such, that a member passed away at 58, 60, 62 years old, and just sad story that the person was only a couple years maybe from retirement. And I always wonder, well, gee, I hope the family was protected if it's someone that we haven't had a chance to chat with or not. And then looking at the reductions here, if someone retires early, now Tier 4 specifically, excuse me, we could retire at 55 if we have 30 years of service or more in the system. But what if we don't? What if someone took some time off to raise a family, or maybe got into the state system a little late, and they say, you know what, I'm 58 years old and I've got 28 years of service in the system, but I just can't do it anymore. I need to retire. You could see here on the table, whatever our pension formula is, 23% reduction in that pension formula by retiring and taking the pension early. Now, if we retire at 58 and just wait until 62 to start taking the pension, then we don't have any reduction. So it's not so much when we retire, but it's actually when we start taking the pension stream. So if someone says, well, you know what, I'll work in private industry, I'll do something to supplement my income from 58 to 62, that's okay. But we do want to make sure that we're not leaving ourselves short, because there are people that have talked to us that said, hey, I'm 58 and I've got 29 years of service in and I can't do this anymore. We'll say, well, look, let's try and get one more year in, even if it's a different job within the district, but let's try and do a little bit more so that we don't suffer that large reduction in there. And then here's looking at, again, we take a look at how do we choose the best option for ourselves, and how do we make sure that we have the right balance between taking an income in retirement and covering a spouse or a significant other. And this is where the pension maximization concept really comes into play, because you could see here, don't pay too much attention to the numbers up here, but more the percentages. So if we're looking at these different percentages, you have about 13 different options through New York State when you look at taking a pension. So the single life option says, give me the most, give me 100% of my pension, which is sometimes called the maximum option. And as long as I live, I will receive that income. Once I pass away, the income stops. When people calculate their pension, they do the rough estimate. All right, I'm 30 years in, I've got 2% per year. Everyone always calculates based on and plans on that 100% number. However, if we're saying, you know what, I need to cover my spouse because he or she doesn't have a pension, and I want to make sure that if I pass away, my spouse is receiving an income, this joint full option will pay us 88% of that pension. So you could see in this example, that's a pretty significant reduction, about a $7,000 reduction there per year, and that's every single year in retirement time. So if I were doing this to cover my wife, for example, then instead of receiving a $60,000 pension, I received 63. I pass away, she receives $63,000. So what we're doing if we're looking at these different options here is we're saying what I'm going to do is I'm going to give New York State some of my pension money back so that if I pass away, they are covering my spouse or my beneficiary for the rest of their lives. So essentially we're buying insurance through the state, which is an option that makes sense for some, doesn't make sense for others. So that's really one of the biggest decisions that people have to make is which option do we take and can we set ourselves up where we could get the maximum income option from New York State while still making sure that our beneficiaries are taken care of. So one thing to note, as we see over here in this box here, I can't just go and fill out my papers in New York State and say, give me the single option without my wife's knowledge or consent, because it is a public pension plan. She needs to sign off on that. So if I go to her and say, hey, honey, sign this, well, what is it? Well, I'm going to take my max pension option. If I die, you get no income. She's going to say, well, I don't think so. Hold on, let's actually figure this out here. Most spouses are going to say, wait a second, let's take another look at this. What other options do we have? So we want to talk about the different options that folks have here. With a single pension benefit, if we take that maximum option, of course, we receive the most income, but again, there's no residual benefit there. And I'm sorry if I'm going quickly, but I want to make sure I get through this and leave time for questions at the end. With a joint pension benefit, as we discussed, spouse will get some of a payment if the pensioner passes away. However, the income is reduced. So if I'm working and planning on, say I'm calculating a $40,000 pension, all of a sudden I go to retire and it's $35,000 instead of $40,000. Well, now we're $5,000 a year short because we hadn't planned on this, and what do we do there? So if we're able to get that maximum option, we want to do that. What New York State recommends, and I highly recommend, now this is a TRS booklet, but the information does apply to all folks within the pension system. If you go on and just Google maximum or an option, it's one of the first 7 or 8 links that you'll see on there. I think if you put in quotes, it'll actually be the first one. But this is a really quick 4-page booklet that'll walk you through the process of choosing a benefit. And there's some basic but good information in there as far as what you need to do. Looking at the second bullet point here is really what we encourage people to do as well. And it's nice that New York State is recommending the same thing, to say, review all your sources of income and look at, should you privately insure yourself versus having New York State insure you? Now, one of the reasons they look at this or mention this is certainly because it's the right thing to do. The second thing is because New York State is saying, hey, if we can move the pension obligation off of our books to somebody else's, we'll take that too. So it's not maybe completely altruistic, but it's definitely a good thing to take a look at for people. So what does that look like? If we can go ahead and we could say, I have accumulated enough assets and or private insurance for my spouse and my family, then I could take the most money that the pension will provide to me. I could take that maximum option. We can live as well as we can based on that max option from the state. So we're getting every penny that we've earned by putting in our 20, 30, maybe more years in the state retirement system. And then if and when I pass away, I know that my family is protected because we have enough income and assets to cover that. So if we haven't built up enough retirement savings assets in order for our spouse and our family to live comfortably, then we could use an insurance policy to supplement the balance of that. So we want to take a look at that option and really see if that makes sense for us. So just to give you a little example here of what it might look like, let's say Carl here is turning age 60, and he's got a pension benefit, a maximum benefit of $5,000 per month. If we were to take a 50% survivorship benefit, it would mean Carl would drop down to $4,400 and his wife Catherine would get $2,200, when Carl passes away, assuming she's still living. So that's a $600 difference per month that if I ask a lot of retirees, they'll say, yeah, I want that $600 extra. I'll figure out something to do with it. So what happens is, if we're doing the single life here, again, Carl passes away, Catherine doesn't receive anything. But with the survivorship option, Carl passes away, Catherine is receiving that $2,200 per month. It's income to her, so it's taxable through federal taxes, not state taxes, but federal taxes to her. So she's receiving, after taxes, maybe $1,900 per month there. If we look at supplementing with life insurance, what we do is we're taking that full pension benefit. Carl passes away. There's no benefit other than there is still a small death benefit through New York State, maybe $15,000, $20,000 or so. But what happens is now Catherine receives that death benefit tax-free, could go to her, maybe to the kids, and that produces the income along with any other assets that they build up for the children. Now, what happens if Catherine passes away? Or let's say that, an example before, and this actually happened to real life, my own situation, not me personally, but my mother and my stepfather. So my parents, of course, were together. They had me, and then couldn't live together anymore. So my mom got remarried to my stepfather, who was in the state pension system. They got married. He retired. They were together in Florida, decided, you know what, this isn't working. They got divorced. But while he was married, because he was in the state pension system and married when he retired, he chose this maximum option, bought a life insurance policy. So now he had these options. He had the flexibility to say, well, you know what, I could change the beneficiary. I could take off now my ex-wife as a beneficiary, and I could put my kids or grandkids on as the beneficiary. I could just eliminate or reduce the insurance plan, or I could just cash it in and use the money that accumulated in there for retirement. So that's what he did. He used that third option and said, you know what, I built up cash in here. No one really needs the insurance benefit at this point in time, so I'm just going to take my money and I'll go on a couple of cruises with it. And that's what he's doing with now his third wife, which I think he's a little nuts for getting married a third time, but who am I to say? It doesn't matter. But what it allowed him to do is just have that flexibility to have some different options down the road, which is really what we want our clients to have. So does it make sense? Is it right for someone or not to do? Really depends on a few different things. It depends on someone's financial situation. If you're in a situation where you've saved well over time, maybe there are inheritances that are coming from your parents or a family member, and we look at a situation and say, you know what, our assets will actually provide enough income for spouses and for kids if the pensioner were to pass away, and we could take a full option without any insurance backup, then that's the best situation right there. But if we think we need a little bit more, then we could look at those different options. Health plays a part too. What's nice about the state program is that everybody qualifies. We could be severely unhealthy. We could smoke a pack of cigarettes a day and have terrible eating habits, and New York State will cover us in this regard here, whereas a private insurance company probably wouldn't do that. So that is certainly a factor. Personal objectives are always a factor too. We don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but we do want to make sure that everyone has access to this information. If we look at the state retirement system, approximately 2/3 of pensioners take the maximum option. Now, there are a number of different factors that go into that. Some people, I'm sure, are single. Some people, like yourselves on the phone, might have a dual pension family where we say, hey, we're okay, we can both take a max option. That's great. And a lot of people have done this strategy where they said we've either saved enough or supplemented with insurance to do that. But when we talk with people, most times we go over just the basics of maximum versus joint option. Pretty much everyone says, well, I would take a joint option because I don't want to leave my spouse uninherited, so to speak. So we're saying, okay, that's your initial thought, and that's a great thought. Well, how come 2/3 of people, after doing the research, are taking a single life option? It makes sense that we should really take a look at this, because now most of those people are doing something different than what they initially thought they might do. That's why we want to put the time in to plan and figure this stuff out. Now, New York State recommends taking a look at a countdown to retirement 18 months before retirement and getting their retirement estimate and then starting to educate yourself on the different benefits and all that. We honestly think that's a little bit too late. If you're within 18 months of retirement, it's okay. It's never too late to plan. However, it's never too early to really look at the different options that we have here, making sure that we give ourselves the most time possible and the most information possible so that we can make smart financial decisions. Because as we said, once you get to a point where you make that election for your pension, you submit the papers, 30-day window to make the right decision. So this is on the Saney's website as well. When you go in and take a look, you'll see these are the different folks that could help you in your different regions. My information is down here on the bottom. Feel free to call or email with any follow-up questions, but we've got about 3-4 minutes left. I'd love to open it up to any questions, Michelle, that people might have typed in, and we could spend the last few minutes answering some of those.
Okay, so we have a couple. The first is, what is a pop-up survivor benefit?
Great question. Pop-up survivor benefit says, I'm going to take a survivor option, so I'll take that reduced option. It's going to cost me a little bit more, but what happens is if, let's say I go out 5 years from now and my spouse predeceases me, then I will actually pop back up to the maximum benefit as the pensioner. So it pops me back up to my full pension option down the road. I don't recover any costs that I paid in those first 5 years, let's say, and it only pops me up in the event of a death of the beneficiary. If we get divorced or separated or I change my mind, that will not pop me back up. I'll only get popped up if my spouse or my beneficiary predeceases me.
Okay. So next question. I know pension is not taxable for New York State income tax. Is that true for my spouse, even if I pass away and my spouse would receive a survival pension benefit?
Right. The way the tax laws stand right now, the New York State pensions are not state taxable, but they are federal taxable for both parties, the pensioner and the beneficiary. But my understanding is that no, it is not state taxable to the beneficiary either, but it is federal taxable. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't factor in the federal income tax into their retirement plan calculations, where they say, oh, I receive this much from the pension system. We do have to make sure we're taking a reduction for income taxes too.
All right. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any others in the panel. Give you a few more seconds to type in anything there.
Either it's very thorough or the sun is distracting too many people from asking questions.
Right. Okay, so just a couple thank yous, Greg. It's been very helpful, a few people say. And just to remind everybody, this webinar, as well as all of the webinars, are archived on saneys.org. So you can look at them there. Let me just look at the panel one more time before we log out. And yes, the slideshow will also be archived with the video recording. And the comment, I think most of us need time to digest it. So that's fine. You can watch it again and pause it and rewind it as many times as you need. There is one more question here. I am 54 years old and had 2 years in new state pension. What is my best options?
2 years in where?
It says I'm 54 years old, had 2 years in new state pension. What is my best option? So, in New York state pension. So 2 years in a New York state pension.
Okay, so if it's only 2 years in the state pension system, we need at least 5 years to vest for a benefit, and we need 10 years to get a monthly pension in the state system. So with only 2 years in the system, really what they're going to do, if you retire with less than 10 years, then you're just going to get a refund of your contributions plus interest in there, and that could just get put into a retirement plan for you. But we're not going to receive a monthly pension benefit unless we have 10 years of service with New York State. So if we're coming into the pension system with only a few years of service, then we're not really looking at anything like this, unless that 2 years was a typo and it should be, 20-something years. There's really no pension benefit that we're going to be counting on because it's such a short term within the system.
Okay. One more question here. I am 54 and have 25 years. Am I eligible to retire at 55?
Okay. Eligible to retire, yes. We can retire anytime we want to. However, based on that one table we showed before, which I'll try and get to it quickly here, there is going to be a reduction here because someone who has 25 years of service is in a tier 4. So with tier 4, in order to retire before age 62 and start collecting benefit, there's going to be that reduction there. So you see it's roughly 3-point-something% each year, gets a little bit higher, goes up to 4 or 5% or so per year. So someone with 25 years in, the calculation is going to be 2% per year that we work, so 50% of our final average salary based on that calculation, but they're going to take that 50% and they're going to reduce it by almost 40% there for that early payment option. So in that situation, with 25 years in, our options are, can we work 5 more years to get to 30 years of service? That would put us at age 60. So at age 60 with 30 years of service, there's no reduction. Or can we somehow figure out how to receive income between ages 55 to 62 so that at age 62 with 25 years, it's the same formula. We'll get 50% of our final average salary, but we won't get a reduction. That 38%, that's a pretty hefty reduction in our salary. So we really want to try and figure out what other options we could explore so that we're not seeing such a big reduction. That reduction lasts forever and go away at age 62. It doesn't decline. Whatever you lock in at, this is your reduction for the rest of your life.
Okay. Another question. I'm 61 and a half at tier 2. What's my best option?
Tier 2, wow, okay. So we don't see many tier 2 folks still out there. Tier 2 has a different calculation for it. Really, once you get to 62, you'll be okay. But that's something that, when you say what's my best option, is it best option for which option to take? That's always, again, a very personalized decision that we need to work with people on. But at age 62 in tier 2, we're at full retirement age. I mean, once we get to, you're 61 and a half, so 6 more months is right around the corner. So then it's just a matter of looking at other assets, looking at what type of income is needed, looking at beneficiaries and things of that nature, and then just running through the different numbers and saying, well, what should I do? What should I take? So that's one of those situations where sitting down with a local advisor, getting all the information from the pension system, getting all the calculations taken care of, and looking at a retirement date, and then really digging through the numbers and all the information and saying, okay, which is the best option for us right now to take. So that one is, now we're at a point where it's time to really seriously take a look at all the numbers and see what the options are for us. And if we're retiring right around the corner, then we don't want to wait too much longer to make those decisions.
Okay. All right. I think that's it, Greg. One more. Just
all right.
Hold on one sec.
All right.
All right. Do you have to work a full year in order for that year's pay to count? To be counted in?
Yeah, they're going to go over a 36-month time period, actually. So they're going to look at income over the past 36 consecutive months. So technically speaking, under the system, they're going to go back to, so if you're not within a calendar year, no, you don't have to. They're going to go back 36 months worth. So It could be a little tricky sometimes to figure out, from an income standpoint. New York State has all the information, so they'll calculate it for you. But no, you don't need to work a full calendar year or even a school year. They're going to go back 36 months. We say 3 years just because it's easier to kind of picture that, but they'll do a 36-month income calculation for you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions before we log off? Okay, one more. Would you kindly show me that 10% slide one more time, please? We just received our ERS statement, and we're actually talking about why the numbers did not add up.
Yeah, well, this could be why. What we want to do is have a conversation with the state pension system, get the details on it, but if income has spiked considerably in any one of those years, this could be a reason why the numbers aren't adding up to what you might think they are. So again, it's looking at every year that's part of the calculation. They look at the previous 2 years and they say if it's more than 10% of the average of those previous 2 years, we're going to cap it at whatever 10% above the average was. So for this example right here, again, most people don't look at this first year in retirement. They only look at the 3rd year, but they'll look at this and say, all right, well, the average of these two is 25,500. We're going to multiply it by an extra 10% is what they're doing, and that number is 28,50. So that number is less than the 31,000 full earnings. So that's our number right there. Same thing with year 2 and year 3. So if you're fairly consistent with your income over the past 3 years, you're not going to run into this. But again, overtime pay, paid out vacation pay, a different job, a promotion or something, that's going to impact your numbers, and it could be something we look at. And again, if we're not prepared, just like you're going through saying, hey, I don't really like this, what's going on here? It could be that this is what's happening there.
Okay. Another question. Can your beneficiary be a trust?
Your beneficiary, no, it cannot. It has to be a living person, because what they do is they calculate the reduction and the payments based on life expectancy. And a trust, of course, is not a living entity, so it can't die. But what they would do is they would look at myself, let's say, and my beneficiary being my wife. She's 6 years younger than I am right now, so her life expectancy is so much longer than mine. So they'll base my calculation and my reduction based on how long they expect her to live. If I left one of my kids on as a beneficiary, my reduction would be tremendous, and it would be ridiculous for me to do that, because they'd say, all right, Greg, if your life expectancy is, say, 80, well, your child then is going to be 52 years old, and then her life expectancy is going to be another 30 plus years or so. They're figuring they're going to pay that person out for a really long period of time. My reduction is going to be significant. A trust they will not allow, because there's no life expectancy on a trust.
Another question. Is a longevity payment included in your final average salary?
Longevity payments are, if they're not coded as salary or earned income, then I am almost certain that those are not included. If you look on the New York State website for ERS, there's a page for each of the different tiers, and it shows what is and is not included in the final average salary calculation. And I am almost certain that that longevity payments are not included, because it's not technically salary. I was surprised that unused vacation days are included up to 30 days for some of the tiers, but longevity payments and think of anything outside your normal working structure are not included. Longevity payments are considered bonuses. They're not considered actual salary. So I'm not 100%, but I'm almost certain that those are not included. I hope I'm wrong, and they are when your calculations are done, because I'd rather get more money than less, but I would not bank on that money being included in there.
Okay. All right. I think that's all of our questions. Anything else?
All right. Well, any further ones could be emailed over to me with my email address that was on there, and that's on the Saney site as well. And I appreciate everyone's time and attention, and any way that we could help out, we're happy to do so.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Well, thank you.
Bye-bye.